when you saw him looking, that made you feel more insecure.
Well, see, it would never just be the looking. There's nothing wrong with looking. It's a matter of saying different things about my weight. There was a time when I had lost a whole lot of weight, but then when I was thin, I was considered a slut. So there was like, you know, no way of winning.
And when you put on weight, you were fat.
Yeah.
So you got the, were these prolonged? I assume you were knocked down.
Yes.
Jill. Did you cry when the episode ended? No, I don't suggest you had to. To tell the truth now, some guys do.
Up until I started treatment, I don't feel it bothered me. It bothered me, but it didn't bother me to a point of emotion.
He would say he was sorry, but you could tell it really wasn't there until he started going to counseling. You know, you could tell that he didn't mean it when he would say he was sorry. It wasn't like right after it happened, he would say, oh, I'm sorry. It would be, you know, days later when he would see the bruises on me and stuff.
Did you ever have to present yourself at an emergency room?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Was this a break in the skin?
Well, it was a number of things. I had what they called contusions on the head. He used to, like, punch me in the head and stuff like that. And see, then it wasn't, that was like 8 years ago. That's when the police weren't real big on domestic violence. You know, they weren't real concerned about it, so I went, and they really didn't do a whole lot about it.
So you were in the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, really, and what you didn't know is that this was going on in a lot of places, but we didn't have a culture which really was
Concerned
with the flashlight on.
Yeah.
And you stayed because, Jill?
I loved him. I love him now. I mean, I know that sounds stupid, but since he's gone to counseling, I go to counseling, we go to counseling together, things are totally different.
May I ask you this terrible question? As best you can share with this audience, Terry, how did you feel what were the feelings? First of all, you were angry, pretty obvious. You were PO'd.
Right.
Did hitting her give you some kind of release? Power. What are you learning in therapy? Power, control. Tell me about that.
Well, everybody's an individual. You have no right to power somebody or control their life. We know that,
but I'm trying to figure out why would it be necessary for a guy like you to feel that you had to have power and control over the woman with whom you were living?
Because that's what I was raised with. I felt that I needed to control the situation around me. And having control her was controlling.
And see, he knew that I lived with this, you know, so I kind of...
That's right. You weren't much of a threat to him in any event.
No, because
you weren't going to call the police.
Yes. But see, now we got to the point that I was calling the police every time he opened his mouth. You know, we got past the point of not calling the police to calling them all the time.
You must have been scared calling the cops.
No, I really wasn't.
Not even the first time?
Maybe the first time, but not much after that. I was to the point of not caring if he got arrested or not.
And you'd sit there and wait for the cops to come?
Yeah.
They'd knock on the door?
And do, half the time, nothing. You know, they would come and I'd have bruises and everything, and they'd say, well, there's not a whole lot we can do without you having a protection from abuse order. And then, you know, we got one of them, and they were called the one time, and I did have marks on me, and they hauled him away in handcuffs, and 3 hours later, he was back home.
And you said, come on in.
Well, no, it wasn't quite that easy. You know, we've been through a lot. I mean, we've gone through a lot that it's been to the point that, you know, I didn't care if he was there or not.
So you were able to get unhooked in a way then?
Yeah.
Emotionally speaking? Yeah. But you're here to say you still love him?
Yes.
You're impressed with his commitment to therapy?
Yes.
You think he's sincere?
Yes.
What has Jill learned about Jill during this thing?
Jill learned that I don't have to put up with anything. You know, I'm a lot stronger than what I used to be. Before I would just sit back and take everything. I don't do that anymore.
How'd you figure you got so helpless? Do you have any idea?
How I got so helpless?
Well, you know, vulnerable to this kind of...
Probably because I saw my dad do this to my mom. You know, this was like the way I was raised. And he was like my Prince Charming. I just figured he was going to make everything right no matter what it took.
And this was frequent, wasn't it? It became very episodic.
I'd say it was probably in the beginning, like maybe every 6 months, and then it started like maybe every 2 months.
And what'd you tell the hospital when you showed up?
I told them that my boyfriend beat me up.
What'd they do?
They just checked me over, told me, you know, what to do, this is fine, go home.
What year was this, Jill?
Probably, I'd say like maybe 1984. It was a while ago.
Michael?
Yes.
You were married in 1984.
Yes.
You were married at age 25.
Yes, sir.
First marriage.
Yes.
Do I understand that the woman that you married was actually the third girl that you dated in your life? Is that so?
Yes, that's correct.
So you weren't Mr. Saturday Night Dandy then?
No, not at all.
You were kind of tentative with women? I don't know.
Shy. I grew up in an abusive household. I never really learned to express myself in any way, shape, or form. The violence didn't really occur until after we were married.
You were another sweetheart during the courtship? Good
Angel.
guy.
Good guy.
Good guy.
Best thing that ever happened.
Right. You're married 6 months. What happens, Michael?
I came home late one evening, real late. We got into a mouth battle, and I punched her. And she ended up going to the hospital and getting stitches in her lip. At that time, I told her I was sorry. This was the next day. I told her that I was sorry. And I convinced her to feel sorry for me. I was pretty good at that. I'm a recovering addict, and I was pretty good at manipulating people.
You're a recovering addict to...
Cocaine.
Cocaine?
Yes.
Were you doing coke at the time?
Yes.
Were the beatings on the downside of the coke high? I don't...
They occurred before, during, and after use.
Really?
Yes.
Do you remember what triggered? I mean, you know, he said you're too skinny, you're a slut, you're too fat. You know, I mean, this is rough verbal stuff, and I don't. Yeah.
I looked to my wife for happiness, happiness that I couldn't find within myself. I looked to her to be happy. I needed her to make me happy.
How does this explain the violence, Michael?
Because when I wasn't happy,
you blamed her.
It was her fault.
The stitches are out, and she heals, and that happened again?
Right. She had a protection from abuse order.
Do you remember the incidents that triggered the violence? I mean, did she say something to you? I don't know. Did you say something? Were you pulling scabs out?
I was hurting. And one way for me not to hurt, okay, I grew up a victim. And one way to not be a victim is to be a victimizer. Is to not hurt, is to be someone to do the hurting. That way you don't hurt.
Did you feel awful when it was over, or did you deny?
I told her what she wanted to hear. I cried. I said I was sorry. It would never happen again. This went on for years.
And then finally she what?
Well, finally...
incidentally, we should tell this audience, and I think you're prepared to do so.
Yeah.
That,
go ahead.
Well, this escalated into sexual violence. So,
yes, it did. Coercive sex.
Some might call it rape, huh?
Some might. I call it sexual assault. Or rape. It's rape. That's what it was.
So in your anger, you forced her to be intimate with you according to your instruction.
Exactly.
And so this would be a demeaning thing for her, obviously. You were the humiliator.
Right, exactly. Trying to take control of a situation that I really had no control over anyhow.
You had feelings of disgust then, did you?
I didn't have any feelings. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know how to feel anything, except that I wasn't going to hurt anymore.
And you did time?
I did 33 months in a state correctional institution.
And
I'm currently on parole.
You're on parole now?
Yes.
And you're an altar boy, I hope, while you're on parole?
I just got reclassified. I see my parole officer once every 6 months.
Reclassified meaning you're still okay and behaving yourself?
Correct.
Did you have therapy in prison?
Yes, intensive. I'd like to also say that I was involved with Advance before I went to prison.
Advance is a treatment center for batterers in Baltimore.
In York.
I'm sorry, in New York, and we'll meet the director here in a moment. You have to still then, are you humble to the point where, are you like an alcoholic? You can't say you're cured, can you?
No, I'll never be cured. All I can do is try to control it. And I do that with guys like Terry and Ted and David and listening to people like
Right.
that.
But when you say I had no feelings, Michael, you did have feelings. I mean, they may have been warped and...
Demented.
Huh?
Demented.
Well, but even that's a kind of a demented is... How do you explain that you would want to humiliate a woman to the point where you not only struck her
physically... Control. Do what I want, when I want, why I want, because I want. Something I never had. It was almost like a drug itself. A high. That feeling of power.
Ted, you were married 18 years. You're separated now. You have 3 children. And you were very violent toward your wife and your kid.
Yes.
Where do you want to start here? Do you remember the first time? Or do you didn't do time. You haven't been in prison?
I have been in jail for like overnight, 30 days, stuff like that.
That's when your wife picked up the phone and said is that right?
He's beating me, and called the state police in the state we were living in at the time, which was Maryland, and they took me off to jail.
When the state police showed up, I assume they came in pairs,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And they walked in. What would they find? Were you on the couch? Was she crying? What's up here?
And they would find her crying and me sitting on the couch like absolutely nothing had happened. Everything was fine. Smoking cigarette, watching TV, drinking soda, whatever, talking, playing with the kids. And
Sober?
Sober.
No empty beer cans hanging around the place?
No.
I
did.
Huh?
Go ahead.
Was the house in order and neat and clean and stuff?
Yes.
Was your wife disheveled? Did she have a black eye? Was there blood running out her nose? I mean, what was the...
She could have red places on her face or her arms. She could be bruised, have a black eye, a bloody lip, poor hair, whatever.
And she'd, of course, be in a very serious state of...
Correct.
Trauma and emotional crying and so on.
Yes.
And so they cuffed you and put you in the back seat and took you off to the nearest jail. Is that it?
That's correct. And I would go to court, and sometimes I would be sentenced for 30 days, sometimes not, but it never stopped me from abusing her.
Right. How long did this go on, Ted?
The abuse?
Yeah.
The entire time of our marriage, the whole 18 years. It started before we were married. We had gotten in an argument, and I choked her. Was the first time. And it was the only time before we ever got married. But then it escalated after that, after we were married.
Was this a premeditated choking, or was it like this a momentary thing? Did she say something? Were you like a volcano? Tell me about how this onset of this.
We were having an argument, and the exact particulars I don't remember at this time, but I took it as bitching and nagging, and it just blew up all at one time. I mean, I couldn't deal with it, so that was my way of shutting her up. Shutting her down so I didn't have to listen to it.
Mm-hmm. Are you likewise a beneficiary of the effort of Advance to help
Correct.
batterers?
Yes.
What have you learned, Ted? What do we know about Ted now that we didn't know before?
Well, we know that Ted is a lovable guy if he wants to be. I have a lot to offer, not only myself, but someone else.
Sure. But why did you behave this way? I mean, here you guys are, looking like pretty decent young men to me. What's going on here? What did you learn about what would be the source of this kind of, what demon ran around your brain making you do?
I couldn't tell you what I was feeling, whether I was feeling helpless or hopeless or aggravated or what it was. All my feelings come out in one explosion, which was anger. It was either to hit, yell, scream, such as that.
He speaks for you, doesn't he? Say?
Yes, sir. It was something I can't tell you what my feelings were at that time. I had them, but I didn't know what they were. So I knew I could be angry, and I knew I could be happy.
But there was no, So you're, like a lot of men, when you got sad, you didn't cry, you got angry.
Correct.
So while depression would cause a woman, this is very round, speaking in tablets here, and there obviously are exceptions. And psychiatry is a pretty complicated thing, and you don't want to get a lesson from me, I'll guarantee you. But women, when they're depressed, they either cry, or they don't speak, or they get moody, or they put their head down. When men get depressed, they get angry.
Correct. And
violent.
And myself, I kept it in. It would go for months at a time, then all of a sudden it would come out with a big explosion, and then all hell would break loose.
Your marriage didn't survive?
No. Did not.
And do you mind? I don't think you mind if I share with this audience that you have sons?
Yes, 2 sons and a daughter.
Are you concerned about the behavior of your sons?
My youngest son is experiencing or showing some of the behaviors now, and
lashing out.
Yes, even towards his mother, he did for a while. We've been working on that, and it was going great for a while. It's been a year and a half I've been working with him, and now it's going back the other way again.
Right. When I was a kid, I was in fights a lot. Mm-hmm. With peers, other kids my age. And I think it's because this may be Simple Simon stuff here. I obviously wanted to prove I was tough, or I was afraid, or I'm not sure. Was violence and aggression a part of your childhood?
Yes. And I was always afraid. That was my way of showing my fear, was to flash out with anger and hit.
Say?
Yes. Just to not be afraid. Just to take.
So fear is what moves.
There's a number of things that are involved. You really can't pinpoint it on any one thing, and I wanted to clarify that. My addiction was not the reason that I did what I did.
You could have been clean. You could have been clean, sober, and everything else. You still would have behaved this way.
Exactly.
Are you there, caller? You wanted to say briefly.
These are not men up here, okay? They all disgust me. My husband used to smack me, punch me, kick me. I hauled off and punched him in the teeth so hard one day, I knocked his caps down his throat. He is now my ex-husband. No one should take this garbage.
Give me a chance to comment on it. I've got several people want to speak to that. He's now your ex-husband. All right. We'll be back in just a moment.
To be part of the audience, please send a postcard to Donahue Tickets, care of NBC, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, New York, New York, 10112. Remember, postcards only, please.
David Housefield, Director of Advance, a treatment center for batterers in York, Pennsylvania, which is near Baltimore. I finally have located this very interesting facility. They're bums. If it hits me once, I'll punch him in the mouth. Get out of here. They're no good. She's still mad. Not a few people in this audience applauded her. You'll speak to that, David.
Yeah, it's sad that a woman who called feels that she has to adopt violence, too. Violence is wrong, regardless of who does it. It works, and what our concern is that men who are abusive get away with it. The solution is not for women to become physically violent either. The solution is for society to hold people who are violent accountable.
Yes.
And for men to assume responsibility and accountability for their own violence.
Right. These young men have been very honest to tell us, you know, that they've done wrong and they're trying to put themselves together. Would you kindly give us a profile here? What's common here? They mentioned control.
Yeah.
Is that central? What?
Yeah, very definitely. The whole issue of power and control in men. It's so ingrained in the personality and in the way we think as men that to not have power, to lose power that we feel entitled to have, is a loss that we're not willing to bear. So consequently, anybody who takes that power, usurps it away from us, is a potential victim. And we lash out to try and punish them or set them straight that we still have the power.
Yeah. You know what impresses me as I read biographies of celebrities, you know, men who grow up to become movie stars, whatever, you know, and they have books written about them, and many of them have been on the program. How many of them characterize, and many of them are first-generation Americans. Many come from cultures where they drag the women around by the hair, just about, or the women eat in the kitchen. This is, and these are first-generation Americans born to these immigrants, and the profile of the father is, I never talk too much. Dour. Get me a beer. Yeah. Close the refrigerator.
It doesn't sound like power, does it? But it is.
A very cold picture of these otherwise wonderful, virtuous, courageous men who at a young age got off a boat with a language they didn't understand in a country they weren't sure about. So we really are only an imaginary line removed from cultures in which women dare not look at their husband when he was scolding her. So it would
look at the ground.
Huh?
To look at the ground.
Yeah.
To look down.
Cast your eyes down when I'm speaking to you. Now the question then is, how you see that as influential here in this?
Very definitely. Coupled with the fact that, as several of them have said, as Mike has particularly said, not having a vocabulary to talk about emotions other than anger, what we call the anger funnel, that all the other emotions that are a part of healthy psyche and healthy expression don't get expressed. There isn't the vocabulary, so it's like a funnel that sucks all that energy in, the energy of sadness or grief or loneliness. And anger becomes the one vehicle that society allows us to express ourselves, and guess who gets hit? The person who is the most available.
Right, and that's either the lover or the wife or the child.
Yeah.
And you sit around in a circle and you hear these guys talking, is that it?
Yes.
Are you there, caller?
Yes, I am. I was a victim for 5 years. I loved my husband desperately. We had children together, and he beat me regularly. And I'm not talking about a shove, a slap. I'm talking this man beat me. At one point, at the final point, he beat me. I was 6 months pregnant. He beat me until I was totally unconscious, tied me to a railroad track in the middle of a field, and if it hadn't been for a wino coming along thinking he was seeing a vision and untying me so that I could escape, I would have been run over by a train. I lost the baby. I went back home after I got out of the hospital. This man had to go to sleep. You understand? He couldn't stay awake 24 hours a day. He got drunk. I tied him to his bed. I took my children. I put our clothes in a plastic bag, and I left. I was not going to be a victim anymore, but I wasn't going to let him turn me into what he was.
Is that the last time you saw him?
No, that wasn't the last time I saw him. We had children.
All right, it's only an hour show here. Now, but this went on for 5 years.
Yes, 5 years I put up with it.
And you finally took off.
I finally left.
And you're divorced from him.
Yes.
Have you remarried?
Yes. And he doesn't touch me.
He hasn't?
No.
All right. You want this, I don't know, you must feel a sisterhood with her, or a feeling of, you knew how she felt.
Yeah, to an extent. There was many times I thought about killing Terry. You know, I can honestly say that.
You were that?
Yeah. I mean, I was never to the point of being beaten unconscious or anything like that. Not that that makes it right, but there was many times that I thought about killing him.
One of the concerns I have about people who, with a story like that, as tragic as that is the fact that there'll be millions of men who might hear a story like that and say, I guess I'm not so bad. All I did is shove her, or all I did is punch her.
Or all I did was yell at her.
And all I did was yell at her. Therefore, I'm not really a batter. I'm not really an abuser. And so that feeling of self-righteousness and the unwillingness, it's what we call disassociation. That kind of a horror story is tragic, what's happened to her. And thank God she's out of that situation. But what men who listen to this need to hear, and who are in the audience, and say, how am I like that man? I haven't tied her to a railroad track, but what have I done? It's still controlling, it's still abusive.
And we'll be back in a moment. Brian, let's go to school here. We'll see you on the monitors. More than 1 million women report domestic abuse every year. Monitors, please. An estimated 3 million more domestic violence crimes go unreported per year. Battering is the single greatest cause of emergency room visits for women, more than auto accidents, muggings, and rapes combined. A woman's chance of being physically assaulted by a partner or ex-partner during her lifetime is 20 to 33%. What does it say about men? 25 to 40% of battered women, not unlike the caller who we spoke with a moment ago, are assaulted during pregnancy. Yes?
Jill, I wondered if you ever struck back at him, and if you did it make it worse, or did he?
I hit him one time. This was like 3 months ago. He wasn't hitting me at the time, and it felt horrible. I mean, he didn't do anything back. He said, go ahead and hit me. I deserve it, you know, for all the stuff that he's put me through, but it made me feel worse.
What I don't understand is how can you say that you love that man when he has repeatedly beat you and even sent you to the hospital?
It is not easy.
We're committed to each other.
Yeah, we each go to counseling. We go to a marriage counselor together.
We should make the point that much of what keeps a woman in a marriage is not love, but insecurity and a desperate feeling that they cannot survive alone.
Right.
Absolutely.
I was abused wife for 30 years, and I got out of it. And I just want to say, for all women, it doesn't get any better. Forget family values, make a new life, and step out.
How do you explain that it took 30 years? Hey, if you're with it.
This morning, before the cameras were turned on, to discuss anything of concern to them by way of informal discovery. But I object to the grandstanding before the camera. We're trying to litigate this case in a fair manner, and for this to occur is just offensive to me.
Welcome back to Crossfire. We're reviewing the latest events in the O.J. Simpson trial with a couple of legal experts. Jane Kirtley is Executive Director of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, and we have one of the nation's best-known defense attorneys, Roy Black.
Roy, you were saying before the break that you would actually favor a gag order because you're worried about prejudicial pretrial publicity affecting the jurors, presumably. But I have to ask, if you're so concerned about that, why don't you gag yourself? We're delighted to have you here on Crossfire every night, but you're here every night expressing opinions, very strongly held opinions, that any potential juror watching would certainly be prejudiced by because you're so wise about them. Why don't you gag yourself?
Well, there's two answers to that. Number one, members of the bar have an obligation to educate the public on court proceedings, and I think it's a great thing that lawyers have been going on TV to explain some of these proceedings.
I agree with you.
Rather than having usually journalists who know nothing about them. Secondly, I'm not a participant in this case. If Bob Shapiro got on this program and started giving opinions, he would be in serious trouble. But since I'm not a lawyer on the case, I have my First Amendment right to give all the opinions I want.
You have a right to do it, but I'm asking you, you cannot be gagged by the judge, but the reason you want the judge to gag others, including the lawyers in the case, seems to me it would apply to you. If you're concerned that the enormous publicity and the arguments being made and the spin by all the parties are going to affect the thinking of potential jurors, and that would be the only legitimate reason to gag anyone, why doesn't that apply to you just as anyone else? Why don't you voluntarily accept a gag order?
Because, Michael, you misunderstand what gag orders are. Gag orders can only go to the participants in the case, meaning the lawyers, the defendants, the witnesses, and the police officers.
I don't misunderstand
the public.
The
public and the press can say whatever they want.
Of course they can, but I'm asking you, should you, if you believe, I'll try this once more, then I'll give up. Obviously, you're beyond the reach of a gag order. But my question is, given the reason you favor a gag order, shouldn't you voluntarily gag yourself? Not that I want you to, of course.
Because with gag orders, you prevent the participants who have actual knowledge of the case from releasing the facts. What on the media we're doing is giving opinions and descriptions of the legal proceedings, which I think are entirely legitimate. That's not going to affect the jurors. What affects the jurors are leaks like bloody ski masks, like how much blood there is, about surprise witnesses, about leaking Detective Furman's background. Those are the things that improperly affect jurors.
But you're part of a process that is magnifying this stuff every time it comes out. You do it with relish just as John and I do.
Oh, there's no doubt about that, but I think there's a legitimate function in giving some criticism to what's going on.
I give up. Go ahead.
Roy, I wouldn't let him lump you in with the two of us. Jane Kirtley, let's go back to this issue of televising a trial. One of the trials that Attorney Black was a part of, the Kennedy Smith trial, was televised, I think, from gavel to gavel.
Virtually, yes.
Do you really think that there was no impact on the decision in that trial by virtue of those cameras being there and the attention given to it?
What I think was that it gave the public a great deal of confidence in the correctness of that verdict. Imagine the situation if the press had been excluded from that proceeding and William Kennedy Smith had been acquitted. I think the public reaction would have been, the Kennedys bought their way out of this again. By the public having seen it, they saw where the strengths and the weaknesses of the cases were. They were able to evaluate the witnesses for themselves. I think it did a great deal to support their sense of the rightness